Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another edition of our webinar series, Inside Immigration. Today, we're joined by panelists at Green & Spiegel, Valerie, Kleinman, and Sonia, Sidhu. Please feel free to ask any questions via the pop-up text bar on the right side of your screen, and we will do our best to address them at the end. If the panelists do not get to your question, you can contact them through the information provided on the screen. And with that being said, I'll hand things over to our panelists.
Thank you, Danielle. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sonia Sidhu. I am a PR lawyer on the PR team here at Green & Spiegel, and I'm here with Valerie Kleinman, who I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm also a lawyer on our PR team, and we have a lot to talk about today. We're nearing December tomorrow, so it's the end of 2022, and there have been a lot of updates as we finish this year and head into the new year. So we're really happy to be here today to share some of these updates and changes with you. And the first topic I wanted to discuss was the recent occupational code changeover. So as many of you may know, every occupation in Canada is categorized using an occupational code system, and we were previously using what's called the 2016 NOC, and it's shifted over to this tier system. And so that means every code that we previously had has now changed to a different code. In many cases, it's not a big change. So some of the codes are really the same, it's just the number is different. But there are other instances where there are some dramatic changes. So there's occupational codes where perhaps there was, one code before, and now there are 3 or 4 or 5 codes that it's being split up into. And really, this is a move to make things a bit more specific, particularly in the IT world, where some of our occupational codes didn't really reflect the types of occupations that we now see. For example, we have a new occupation code for data scientists, which didn't exist before. Data scientists used to have to fit within other codes that perhaps weren't the best or most accurate description of what they're doing. And now we do have this new occupational code for that category. There's also been some pretty dramatic changes in terms of shifting from this NOC system to the tier system. We previously looked at, high-skilled occupations, 0A, B, and that had certain meanings for eligibility for certain permanent residence programs and other categories. We've now moved to a tier system, which allows certain occupations, like, for example, for personal support workers, to move up and to be able to be eligible for more programs and options. And there's a couple that have actually gone down. So we're seeing some shifts in terms of the occupations a little bit in some areas. Concretely, this has had an effect on the processing and systems that IRCC uses. So for example, in the express entry system, all occupational codes had to be updated for people to be still considered in the express entry system. So individuals who have a profile in the express entry pool, their occupational codes had to be updated as of November 16th in order to still be able to be considered for an express entry draw. So individuals who have not updated this information are not considered for future draws. At the same time, this has meant some of the provincial programs have had to update their systems as well for permanent residents. So for the PNPs, at one point, BC had to shut down for a bit to make these updates in their system. And as a result of this change, Ontario required anybody who had an expression of interest in their Ontario PNP system to actually re-register completely. So individuals who have not re-registered will not be considered for future invitations when the province decides to select candidates for nomination certificates. So there's some big changes there. Big changes too, it affects work permits as well, LMIAs, because we do have, like I said, NOC codes that have now split up. So that can have implications on prevailing wage when looking at, LMIAs or other types of work permits. looking at, whether the individual meets the requirements of the occupational code, because now moving forward, we're looking at these new NOCs instead of or these new tiers instead of the old NOCs when preparing applications. With that, I think we should talk about some of the changes that we're going to, or some of the expectations that we hope to see for the coming year.
Yeah, so I mean, on November 1st, the immigration plans for 2023 to 2025 were announced. It's always important to know, like, these immigration plans get announced every year. They're released as a guide and they're not to be read black and white. Like, things happen, events happen around the world that affect information, new programs are introduced. So just always use it as a guide, not a, hey, absolute, this is how much, how many immigrants are going to come under this category and so forth. But with that being said, in 2021, we did see an all-time immigration record being broken, wherein Canada did welcome over 400,000 immigrants in one single year, which was phenomenal. What's even better is with this immigration plan, they have outlined even higher numbers for the next 3 years. So in 2023, they aim to have 465,000 immigrants enter. Now, the plans are released every year. So in 2002 or 2023, the aim was actually about 18,000 people less. So they're upping immigration year over year. In 2024, we're aiming for 485,000. In 2025, we're aiming for 500,000. So the aim for the next 3 years is 1.5 million new immigrants. So that is a phenomenal number. A lot of this has to do with addressing our critical labor market shortage we have right now, and a focus on like regional immigration for small towns, rural communities, to like the PNP programs, the Atlantic immigration program, the rural and northern immigration pilot programs. So we are going to see a push towards these areas. So if you are working in outside of the GTA, expect to see some maybe positive movement. In this immigration plan, there's also a mandate to reunite families, which is amazing as well. For example, like the parental grandparent application, the number has been raised to 28,500. So for contrast, in 2022, the intake was supposed to be for a little over 23,000. That's a significant increase, which is absolutely amazing because seeing Canada recognizes that families be united is amazing, and it's fulfilling a lot of people's goals. Once they get here, then they they can move their parents or grandparents over. So I mean, in itself, like, we will have to brace ourselves for 2023. There will probably be a lot of changes coming in the way selections are happening, where they're happening, targeted draws. So we'll just have to see how it all plays out and go from there. With that being said, we want to talk about the trends that we have seen, especially with like express entry. So express entry draws resumed this summer, which is amazing. Given the pause, though, we had seen that the scores being selected were relatively very high. We have seen the trend, invite over invite, be that there has been a decrease in the scores. Slowly but steadily, there has been a decrease in like pretty much in every draw. The invites are still happening every 2 weeks. So even last week when we had the overhaul of the NOC system, there was still an invite, which it's good news for everybody. Nothing has come to a standstill. We're not seeing any pauses. We don't have any indication for a pause to be coming. So we do suspect the draws will continue every 2 weeks, and the scores will slowly and steadily decrease. So in this situation, if you're close to the point cutoff, like, just patience is key. Keep yourself in status. And also, what I always tell people is do whatever you can in your power to increase your score. So if you have the ability to rewrite the language exam, try it. Try the practice exams online. If you can score better, even that 1 or 2 points may be the difference in an invite at this point. So do what you can, and take the power into your hands to hopefully get an invite when you can. Now, with the pause, with post-pandemic, we have also seen a lot of backlog in immigration. I mean, it's been a very hot topic throughout the year, even previously. In practice, we are seeing quite a bit of movement happening. Backlogs seem to be slowly being chipped away at. We have seen a lot of movement through various countries with passport requests, federal skilled worker stream, applications being finalized, work permits, visitor visas. So if you are in a situation where you have applied a long time ago, if you want to look into the application, seeing what the delay is, like it's always beneficial not to just sit on the file. Find out, look into what the issue is, and maybe talk about, hey, what are the trends? Are we seeing applications that were submitted around the same time being decided, or were they decided like 5 months ago and then there might be something wrong? It's always good to get the advice, but we are seeing a positive movement towards the backlogs. That's not to say, though, that the backlogs don't exist. They still do exist, but we are seeing a positive chipping away at it.
Yeah, and for people who are seeing, though, that their applications are taking longer than the processing time, there are some options, that we can look at and talk about in terms of, if we need to, in some situations, file a mandamus application in court, maybe doing an access to information to see what's happening on the file. So if it is, if the timing really seems to be unreasonable, there are ways we can take a look at it to see if something can be done to try to have some movement on the file. But unfortunately, it is something that's affecting everybody in every category, temporary, permanent. I'm seeing delays on the temporary processing side too, people waiting long times for visas and work permits. But hopefully, we do see some more greater movement in the new year, and some hopeful returns to what we used to see in terms of processing times, which was at least a bit more predictable than what we're seeing now. With the ending of this year, we're also seeing some programs that are going to be opening and closing with the end of 2022, beginning of 2023. Individuals who had previously submitted an intent to sponsor their parents, an expression of interest in 2020, were considered this year for the parental sponsorship program, and people were chosen from October 12th to 20th and invited to apply for their parents' permanent residence, parents and grandparents' permanent residence application. So unfortunately, if you haven't received an invitation, the intake is now closed for 2022, and those applications for the lucky winners, because it's a bit like a lottery, so the lucky winners who did get an invitation, those applications are going to be due in December, so coming up really soon, and that will conclude the 2022 selection process for parental sponsorships, which of course really was relying on individuals who had expressed their interest in the program in 2020. We're also seeing at the very beginning of 2023, the home child care provider pilot, home support worker pilots reopening. I mean, the home support worker pilot has still been open, but the home child care provider pilot, there haven't been spots available since January 2022. The program is expected to reopen on January 1st, but of course we'll see if there's updates closer to in terms of the exact timing. And these are programs for individuals who work as caregivers. There are different criteria depending on the person's experience and Canadian work experience. There are certain language requirements, educational requirements, but that is coming up very soon. And based on last year, we certainly expect that the home child care provider spots will go very, very quickly at the very beginning of January. Last year, they were gone within about 17 days. So quite possibly if they could go faster this year, but we of course will have to wait and see. We wanted to just talk a little bit about international students who are currently on study permits, because there were some announcements recently about the ability of international students to do some full-time work during their studies. It is quite fact specific. There's a lot of factors involved in terms of who who is eligible for this. There's, questions of timing. When did they apply for their study permit in order to be eligible to work full-time during normal scheduled school? Because under normal circumstances, students can only work part-time during school sessions, and they only are able to work full-time during scheduled academic breaks. But as always, students do have certain requirements they generally need to meet in order to be eligible for any kind of work, in terms of meeting the requirements of their study permit and the program, in order to benefit from these sort of perks to be able to work within the work permit. I don't know, Sonia, you had anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, just a couple of things. Like Valerie mentioned that, for the home childcare provider, home support worker program, there's language tests, educational requirements. These documents have a lot of lead time in some countries. So if you are interested in it, don't wait until January to start the process. Like in January, your application really should be ready to go, given the quota and everything. So if you are planning on taking advantage of this program, like it would be beneficial to start working on the file now and see the lead times that are leading up to the documents. Also with the parent and grandparents applications, we have seen situations where the invite did not arrive in the emails provided. So immigration has provided a tool where you can input your confirmation number to see if you did get an invite. So if you're in a situation where you didn't receive an email for your selection, just double check with that tool that you aren't selected and the email either didn't go to your junk or didn't come in, or if there's a bounce back. You don't want to be in a situation where you did get that invite and you just didn't complete the application. But that's about it. We can see if there's any questions here.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll answer sort of generally one of the questions, and if there's something more specific, I do encourage you to reach out to us directly. But there's a question about being in the Express Entry pool. So when a profile is created in the Express Entry pool, it's valid for 12 months. So after 12 months, if the person does not effectively re-register, they're no longer going to be considered for Express Entry. That being said, the person before the 12 months could be in a position where they are no longer in the pool. And that could be because they no longer meet the eligibility requirements for the programs under which Express Entry operates. So for example, federal skilled worker or Canadian experience class. If somebody's language results expire, they could be removed from the Express Entry pool. If their educational credential assessment expires, they could be removed from the pool. And keep in mind that naturally your people's scores will fluctuate up and down over time. They have a birthday, they may lose points. If they've, perhaps they've continued their employment, they now have more Canadian work experience, they may gain points. But if they are in the pool based on the federal skilled worker program, they have to continue to meet the or Canadian experience class, they have to continue to meet those requirements. So if they no longer do meet the requirements of that program, perhaps for federal skilled worker, it's a 67-point assessment. So if you had a birthday, you might lose points, or your language results expire, or your work experience is no longer within the period of time being assessed, you could be removed from the pool for one of those reasons. So being in the pool is not something permanent. You do have to continue to meet eligibility requirements. Your documents have to still be valid, and it does have to be within the 12-month period. And then as an added layer now within our NOC change, we know that while maybe you're in the pool, you're kind of in limbo if you haven't updated your NOC codes, because you won't actually be considered for any future Express Entry draws at this time.
Yeah, thank you, Valerie. I mean, that kind of leads into another question that asked what NOC code should be put into an Express Entry profile. You actually cannot put in the old NOC codes anymore, like the system has changed over, so you would be using the new NOC code classification. Now, IRCC has made it very easy. There's
So there's a table to help facilitate to determine which code you're in, but it's also very important to always look at the occupational descriptions, because ultimately looking at the duties. And as we said, because some of the NOC codes have split up, it's not always, you know, a clear cut, you know, answer of which NOC code was the person in then and are they in now. So sometimes there is quite a bit of analysis required to look at the majority of the duties, if they, you know, fit the person's experience, and also, you know, does the person meet the educational requirements of the NOC code and other types of perhaps certifications. It really will be very specific based on that occupation. So there is definitely some analysis involved in there in selecting the correct NOC code, particularly in cases where it is one of those occupations that's now split up into multiple occupations.
Thank you, Valerie. I think that answers pretty much. Oh, there's one other question, like, can you apply for permanent residency from inside Canada, or do you have to apply from outside of Canada? It really depends on the program and your status, so it's really case-to-case dependent. But I think that's it for the questions, unless anybody else has any other questions.
Okay, awesome. So that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and a special thanks to Valerie and Sonia for sharing their expert knowledge. If you'd like to discuss today's topics in more detail, please reach out to book a consultation. Details can be found on the screen now, and I encourage you all to sign up for our e-alerts and follow us on social media to keep up to date on the latest developments inside Canadian immigration. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.